All right, welcome back, Chelsea fans, to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. That is right. We are still in the silliest of seasons, and to do any sort of podcast without one of our journalist friends, and in this case, Ben Jacobs, would be equally as silly as we look to get caught up on everything that is happening in a busy, busy transfer window and lead up to the start of the Premier League season on Sunday for Chelsea Football Club against Crystal Palace. So, lots to get into in this one. We will talk about the incomings and outgoings, of course, but then look ahead to the start of the season, which thankfully is almost here, and maybe a little bit of the money on the books at the end of this one. But to everyone who submitted questions from our Discord, really appreciate that, because it always it's good to see where your head is at this point in the window. But Ben, since we last talked, obviously the biggest news in Chelsea world is Levi Colwell's. I don't want to call it a season-ending injury officially, but likely will take him out for most of the season, just given standard ACL recovery times. Uh, it kind of sucked the air out of the room if you're a Chelsea fan, because one, he's a academy product. Two, he's been on a rise from a trajectory standpoint, and three, I think, was just hitting a performance stride and a leadership stride that everyone was really, really excited about. Do you know anything more about the injury and what his recovery time is going to be looking like?
Yeah, it's ACL and it's a long-term injury, and therefore the rehabilitation isn't clear in terms of an exact return date. But obviously,
Yeah.
minimum the first half of the season, and as a consequence, Chelsea are going to have to make do with what they've got or look in the market. But all indications, despite Enzo Maresca's comments, are that they're going to stick with the defenders they have to try and find a solution. And obviously, Jorel Hatto has come in and can play left centre back as well as left back. The injury required surgery. That surgery was successful. As you say, it's a real blow because Levi Colwill, not just in form, but one of the leadership group, was excellent at the Club World Cup. So now you start to look at that back line and think, do you gamble? And I think it would be a gamble on Jorel Hatto. Do you keep Renato Vega, but all indications are he'll leave? And if you don't utilize either of those options, you're left with right centre back pairings. And it's kind of ironic in light of the injury, because I did an interview with Levi Colwill along with other assembled media 2 pre-seasons ago. And Levi Colwill was sort of saying how baffled he was that managers generally don't want to play two left-sided centre-backs together, but they're always happy to play two right-sided centre-backs. And that seems to be the industry feeling, that managers don't think twice about playing two right-sided centre-backs. And that's maybe the clue as to why Chelsea think they're okay. It might be good news for Trevor Chalobah, which would be a popular stay amongst the fan base. You've got Tosin there. Benoit Badiashile has obviously had a few injury issues, but Chelsea feel his development is on track. Wesley Fofana will hopefully get through the season playing a lot of minutes as well when he returns. So there are options there. But I think rather than it being Hatto or Vega, first Premier League game of the season, the clue was maybe in that Milan lineup that Enzo Maresca is prepared to go with two right-sided centre-backs to cushion the blow. And it is a big one of losing Levi Colwill.
Can we talk about the injury return for Badiashile, who it looked like, and I don't know if it was ever confirmed, looked like went off with a hamstring against Benfica in the Club World Cup after playing maybe what was his best 60 minutes of football in a Chelsea shirt for some time. Any news on his injury or his recovery?
Yeah, I think it's a September return for Benoit Badiashile. Whether early or mid-September remains to be seen, but we're not looking at too far off, nor was the injury so bad that they've had too many concerns. And as you say, Badiashile starting to have, I think, a lot of support within Chelsea, that his development is not just on track, but he's ready to play in
Yeah.
Premier League games and be consistent. And luckily for Chelsea, They've got other options. Tosin, who's also valued off the field. Trevor, who's been extremely reliable. Wesley Fofana went back to. So we will see a situation, I think, where maybe Maresca chops and changes and works out where the best chemistry is and who the best partnership is in absence of Levi Colwell. But I think the long and short of it, why they're not just diving in and signing, say, Marc Guehi, is partly because of the age, and not so much the age in terms of does it stagger the pathway of Joral Hatto, more Levi Colwell and Marc Guehi not having a big enough gap. I think there's 2.5 years between them. And as a result, you might solve a problem in the short term, but you're left with a long-term issue of having two England centre-backs fighting for the same spot. And obviously the other thing with Marc Guehi is just that these minutes and game time that he's looking for are in light of the World Cup. So telling Marc Guehi you could come and play at Chelsea every week now is not going to be a selling point if you can't promise it in the second half of the season when Levi Colwell's back. And the last thing I think Guehi wants is to get to sort of March, April or May and find he's on the bench and not playing consistently, because who's to say there won't be another Levi Colwell that comes into Thomas Tuchel's thinking, coupled with Harry Maguire, because we know that Tuchel is prepared to pick older players like Jordan Henderson or Ivan Toney. So getting Marc Guehi isn't as simple as why don't Chelsea do it? You've also got to persuade the player he's basically going to play 38 Premier League games. And even though Levi Colwell is injured, I'm not sure Chelsea can do that when you consider that Colwell's not going to miss all 38 Premier League games. And again, this is why I think they feel Fofana's going to get fit, Badiashiel's going to be fit, Trevor Chalobah is in form and liked by both the players, the manager and the fan base, and Tosin continues to be a really valuable squad option as well. And you've got Josh Anchimpong, who of course is versatile and can play across the back line as well. And all these players need pathways and opportunities. And that's why Chelsea's position, even though Maresca appeared to contradict it, but within the ownership and the recruitment team, I'm still told they want to try and find a solution from within. Can we entirely shut the door? No, only because you have the sort of beauty and the curse of a window open when the season starts. So what if they start the season and there isn't an obvious partnership, or there's errors, or there's question marks? What if they pick up another injury? That's the advantage of the window being open. But of course, the disadvantage is it leads to this sort of unsettling air of what are they going to do next? And I think Chelsea's other defenders that are fit and available would probably like to have clarity now as to whether they're the ones that are going to benefit from Colwell's absence.
So just to be very clear, Chelsea want to stick with the options that they have, even though two of those options are hurt and only three of them are healthy. Is there I guess, a return day for Fofana, who, obviously missed the entire Club World Cup, has been on rehab since, was it early
Yeah.
April, May, March of last year? So, or of this year, obviously. Where do you see him kind of entering the picture here?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the defenders, you've obviously got Tosin and Chalobah who started against Milan. It wouldn't at all surprise me if that's the
Yeah.
case in the opening game against Crystal Palace. Josh Achimpong, like I said, is versatile. Benoit Badiashile is probably only 2 or 3 weeks away from a full return and being able to actually be in matchday squads. Wes Fofana, I think, a little bit longer. And when he comes back, it might be a bit like Reece James, where they play him, don't play him, protect him. So I don't think the return of Wesley Fofana will necessarily be the return of starting every single game. But they feel that they've got enough there. Obviously, at this stage, we're anticipating a possible loan for Aaron Anselmino and a likely departure of Renato Vega, which do take two others out of the mix. But they want to try and back the existing defenders because you do still have Joral Hatto there as well, who has played a lot of football at a left-sided centre-back because he was predominant left-sided centre-back before Francesco Farioli came into Ajax and converted him to a left-back predominant. Farioli obviously left Ajax, but he continued playing at left-back, but he's very comfortable switching back to left centre-back. So I think Chelsea will still feel they've got lots of different options that they can try. And luckily, Trevor Chalobah and Tosin have predominantly stayed fit and are available regularly for selection as well. So that's kind of how they view the defence at the moment. But again, if you don't start the season well, if you're suddenly screaming for it because you're exposed, in the first few games, there's always just that slight percentage chance, even though it's not Chelsea's plan at the moment, that you go back into the market. But I think if it happens, it would happen due to start to the season and then occur very late in the window. And, in an ideal world, the other thing they could consider is completely going against recruitment, long-term model, market opportunities, and sort of just say who might be available on a loan that's prepared to do one season at Chelsea, is older, play quite a lot, and then know that when Colwell's back, their game time would be diminished, but then you send them back on loan. Perhaps you even put a January break clause in. It wouldn't surprise me if they did something late, if it's that type of opportunism rather than a profile like Marc Guehi, for the reasons that I explained in my previous answer.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario as well. Let's talk about the implications for Josh, because last week the thought was, when we were talking about like the pathway from Cobham and all this sort of stuff, that like someone like Josh could and should is likely to stay at Chelsea for the season. Now it feels like it's going from like a could and should to a yes and will probably play some decent minutes at the start of the season, just with the rotation that's required. He looked really solid in some cameo minutes against Bayer Leverkusen. He got the start, and I think that was, Chelsea played a pretty interesting preseason. We'll talk about that in section 2. But is your feeling, if they do not dip back into the market, that Josh will potentially feature more than maybe we thought this time last week?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're ready. And it's not a case of will he feature more, because I think when you have 2 preseason friendlies in quick succession, the first is often about squad players, and the second is often about your starting 11 or close for the first Premier League game of the season. So my gut says, although Benoit Badiashile may obviously change this in September, but as of now, sources I speak to and my read of the situation is that Tosin and Chalobah will be the 2 pairings, and Josh will be the one that maybe comes on and plays his way into contention as the season progresses. But he will get opportunities. And I think Chelsea have always said that they value him, they want to keep him. So if there was a scenario where they didn't have that flurry of outgoings maybe 7-10 days ago, the Ugwachukwus, the Broyers, still waiting on Chukwuemeka, but that's expected to happen, there could have been a scenario where for the right price and begrudgingly, Chelsea at least considered a Josh Achimpong exit. And we mentioned in previous shows how Bournemouth are the club to watch. But this is very much about the backstory being vital to understand how highly Chelsea rate Josh. Because last season, there was the whole standoff and how he'd be frozen out if he didn't sign a new deal. And then, of course, everyone aligned and he did sign a new deal. And that was very much because Chelsea and Josh Achimpong were on the same page, that he was going to get pathway, he was going to get minutes, he was going to get opportunities. And that has proven to be the case since that standoff and very difficult period for the player. So if Chelsea suddenly turned around and said, you're not going to be part of the squad that much, you're not going to get that many minutes, then I would expect Josh Achimpong to go back to pre-contract and be saying to Chelsea, I've got options, I can get Premier League football elsewhere. And this is where Chelsea rating Josh so highly likely means that the pathway will allow him to get a significant amount of minutes. We'll have to wait and see if that's as a starter. We'll have to wait and see if he's the one to really benefit from the absence of Levi Colwill. Obviously, if you look at the lineup and how the pairings have been fielded, it's kind of Trevor, I think, that was moved to the left. So actually Josh started instead of Tosin, and then Tosin started instead of Josh. So still on that right-hand side. But it's a knock-on effect in many ways because Trevor's been moved over, and then there's definitely an opportunity for either Tosin or Josh Achimpong or Benoit Badiashile to get minutes. And I think Josh will feel he's very much in contention to be starting Premier League games. And if that doesn't happen, then that's an in practice example over the next season of is he or isn't he going to get the pathway he thought when he signed the new deal. So that's what makes it so fascinating. Because right now, Chelsea don't want to sell. Bournemouth know nothing's possible. And Josh Achimpong is 100, if not 1,000% committed to Chelsea because he knows he's been promised these minutes. But if you flash forwards a year and those minutes don't come, then my expectation is the player may agitate a bit more to go and be a Premier League starter elsewhere. If he doesn't get that opportunity and if he doesn't prove himself to be worthy of a regular Chelsea starter. But we're getting ahead of ourselves because at the moment we've seen no indication from any cameo other than this is the real deal. And that is ultimately why Chelsea gave him a new contract and have big faith in the player.
Yeah. And it also, I think, depends which fullback stays back in this kind of evolving back three. We did see in the first friendly that when Cucurella stayed back, obviously the shift happened where Trev became the CCB and Josh was the RCB. But if Mal Gusto stayed back, then it kind of shifted over. Josh is capable of playing almost anywhere. Let's take our first ad break really quick. We'll come back to all the rest of the incomings and outgoings, and thanks to sponsors, we'll be right back. Well, that's center backs, which was an interesting development that I know Chelsea did not want to have to even think about to start the season. Is there any other movement from an incomings perspective that is notable? It feels like it's kind of slowed on that front over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think behind the scenes, they're lining up these two deals for Alejandro Garnacho and Xavi Simons. They're not pulling the trigger or formally bidding, partly because prices drop in the latter hours of the window. So inaction is action because you know that the prospective seller is sweating over the price. And then the other thing is that they need to move along Christopher Nkunku and very likely still Nicholas Jackson. So they could have a verbal deal and they could know it's very smooth and quick and simple for both Xavi Simons and certainly Alejandro Garnacho, but they still need those outgoings first. So the possibility of Christopher Nkunku to Leipzig, for example, is not linked in terms of a swap deal, but they want those outgoings before they really formalize the incomings. And this is, I think, why Alejandro Garnacho was hinting with his sand timer emoji on his Instagram that he was waiting for Chelsea because he knows the club to club won't be a problem. So my understanding is that, contrary to some suggestions, which of course I respect from other outlets, but my info is it isn't this Garnacho will decide between Chelsea or staying at Manchester United. It's actually Garnacho wants out of Manchester United. Manchester United want Garnacho out, and the player only wants Chelsea, despite the fact that we'll hear other links if the deal doesn't get over the line and there's an element of games. So it all comes down to, can Chelsea get the price close to 30 million, which has been their starting point, or are Manchester United going to get their 50 million asking price? And I see it both ways, because if you're Chelsea, you're saying it's late in the window, players on a wage you want off the books. You have an issue between manager and player, at least tactically speaking, because he didn't like playing centrally in Ruben Amorim's system. So Chelsea have got a lot of leverage to say, you need this done. And then add to the fact Man United are somehow trying ambitiously for Carlos Baleba and maybe a goalkeeper. And it all creates a situation where pure profit on the books is very much needed. And whether that pure profit is 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, it's all welcome for Manchester United. And Chelsea, therefore, have been very strict on their valuation because they think there's a deal to be had. On the Manchester United side, they're equally entitled to say Alejandro Garnacho, with his high ceiling and age, should not be worth less than Noni Madueke, a deal that Chelsea did and valued at 52 million. And what I think will happen is that the add-ons and the structure of the deal will be vital. And I think Chelsea may be able to bill it as a bargain with a fixed fee that's lower than Manchester United want, but maybe Manchester United will get the add-ons, taking it up to a total number, and it will end up being a deal that suits all parties. Chelsea would also be prepared to do it like with Jadon Sancho, with a loan and an obligation to buy.
That's what I was going to ask. Did the Jadon Sancho return mess that up for a future deal with United?
I don't think so, because I think the penalty was all parties. So Manchester United don't mind the penalty because they can go and sell Jadon Sancho for 17 or 20 million and then add the 5 million penalty and still get the same 25 million number. It's just given them more of a headache because Sancho hasn't dropped his terms to get a quick deal. But in essence, Man United will still get the money and all parties agreed to that. But I think what makes it different is not so much that Chelsea took the penalty fee, but that they need at the Manchester United end this pure profit. So loan with obligation that may not happen means the pure profit may not happen. And then by the time the obligation happens, it may be that we're in a different financial year. So that's another consideration Manchester United need to think about in the structure of the deal.
So I guess, Ben, we've been talking about these same two players for a while. Xavi Simons still the same situation. Chelsea negotiating, looking to sell. He's still kind of playing a waiting game. He flew out for preseason after I think maybe not being as active in their preseason after the last couple of weeks. Or I guess, are both of these deals in your mind? And talk about Siemens first, if you prefer, kind of end of window in the closing stages sort of vibes for you now.
Yeah, by the way, I don't know what's going to exhaust out first, the window or my voice. We'll wait and see, but
Yeah.
hopefully we're able to carry through this podcast. So with Xavi Simons first, the complication I'm told is not on the Chelsea end, other than the fact that they're waiting for Christopher Nkunku and very possibly Nicholas Jackson to depart. But the complication on the negotiation is that this is a 50 plus 30 euros outlay on the Leipzig side, done in only January. And Leipzig do not have to tell Chelsea how many of the add-ons have or haven't been triggered. And it's in PSG's interest to say all of them because they've got a sell-on clause. So you've got a bit of poker going on here where Leipzig, especially in light of selling Benjamin Sesko, because they've got their money in that they needed in a year where they've got no European football, which is very rare. So it's damaging on the books, therefore, and they won't have budgeted for no European football because they tend to have it season on season. But now they've got that Sesko money, Leipzig can kind of dig in a little bit and insist on trying to get this 70 million euros valuation. And Chelsea's belief is essentially that given they only signed the player permanently in January, there's a deal to be had for less that still gives Leipzig a whole lot of profit. And it will essentially come down to not just the number, but the overall structure of the deal. And that will also factor in, I would imagine, a sell-on clause that still allows Leipzig to make a fair amount of money further down the line. So I think Chelsea are trying at 55, 60 million euros. Leipzig wants 70 million euros. Clubs have got a good relationship. Xavi Simons wants the move. I know we've heard some recent links with Man City. You can't discount a hijack bid, but that's also where Chelsea are keeping their verbal talks discreet and quiet and not making formal bids. Because if they were to get a formal bid accepted at 55, the rest of the industry turns around and goes, hang on a minute, Leipzig actually are giving a great deal. And that's when you worry about a Man City, a Bayern, even an Arsenal if they don't move for Eberechi Eze, because Spurs are now trying for that deal. So I understand why Chelsea are being discreet. They've got the player buy-in. They think there's a deal for less because the 30 million euros of add-ons, many of them haven't been paid. And the reason why I think this deal and Alejandro Garnacho could get done later in the window is partially because Chelsea want the outgoings of Nkunku and Jackson, and also because you're playing that game of when does, in these last few weeks of the window, your selling clubs start to panic and go, wait a minute, we might be stuck with a player deep down we want to sell, or when does that selling club suddenly realize they need to drop the price? So you wait, and then it becomes more urgent in the final weeks of the window for the seller to resolve it. Otherwise, you've got an unhappy Xavi Simons and an unhappy Alejandro Garnacho, and that's when you pounce. So if it was earlier in the window, maybe other clubs would be moving and fans would be entitled to say, why is our recruitment team not got going? But at this stage in the window, sometimes just waiting a week or two and making the selling club sweat can make all the difference in getting the price that you're looking for.
We got a question from Blue London 1905, whose personal stance on Garnacho may not be as positive, but he says the club seem hell-bent on Garnacho. I just don't see it. Is there a financial aspect at play here? Do our club think that they can get him at such a good value that they could potentially sell him on later as a potential financial benefit? Are you hearing anything about that?
Not really. I mean, I don't think Chelsea's model ever buys an asset just because they think they're flippable. Otherwise, you'd be purchasing somebody that you don't actually think is of the Chelsea standard. Of course, what could happen is you could purchase someone for Strasbourg, back their development to end up at Chelsea, but know if they don't make it, they're good enough at Strasbourg's level, which is also very high. And then you turn a profit there. So of course, Chelsea's model looks for value. And of course, part of that value is protecting yourself. So if it doesn't work out, you have the ability to bring money back. But I don't think you ever go in saying, Marc Guehi, 5 million, we're just going to flip him. David Datro Fofana, cheap, we'll flip him. Carney Chukwuemekwa, 20 million, we'll definitely get 40 million. Because if players think that they're sort of just being fattened like a sort of guinea pig ahead of Thanksgiving or whatever. I mean, that's a terrible metaphor because Turkey is obviously Thanksgiving.
Yeah, we'll work on your Thanksgiving analogies in the future. But yes,
but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
if you're fattening the turkey to basically sacrifice and eat it, then what happens is that the players realize they're just commodities and that they're being stockpiled, and that maybe deep down they have no belief they'll have a Chelsea pathway. So we kind of discussed this on the other show, that everyone coming in is being exposed at a young age to first team football with a view that if they're chucked in at the deep end, they can work and compete. But of course, when you've got 2-3 players in every position, there's always a danger that one of those players locks down the spot, dominates for many years. And I think Nkunku's been unlucky in that respect, because I think a lot of Chelsea fans, when it was pre-agreed, were really excited about Nkunku. Then he picked up an injury in a season under Maurizio Pochettino where Chelsea were just not signing players that were contributing offensively. And had Nkunku been fit, he'd have surely got opportunities and surely scored goals. And then, of course, you get a scenario where the number 9 spot was wanted by Maresca as a more defined kind of player in the Nicholas Jackson mold, and Cole Palmer explodes since day one in number 10. And because Enzo Maresca has like an advanced 8 or a 10 or a second striker, and all of those positions are in the wheelhouse of Nkunku, he just never had the opportunity. But it doesn't mean he's a bad player, and it doesn't mean that he's diminished in valuation, and it doesn't mean he's not up to the Chelsea standard, and it doesn't mean that he was signed with a view to being sold. And if anything, they might not even get the money that they paid back for him, because 52 million might be a big ask, given the fact that it's obvious, like with Garnacho and Man United, that Chelsea want Nkunku out. So the valuation drops a little bit. So I think the point of the model, to give that example, is about overstocking to an extent at first team level, rather than keeping these players in the academy, backing them all to succeed, trying to sign them all at value with rare exceptions, such as Mykhailo Mudryk, Enzo Fernandez, where if they don't work, you're probably never getting your money back. But those are the ones you say, we feel locked that they stand a chance. And with Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo, they're right. With Mykhailo Mudryk, they will probably pay the price, regardless of what happens, because at some point he'll leave the football club for likely significantly less than they paid. But if you think about everyone else that's come in the 5 to 30 million bracket that's under the age of 23, they genuinely think all these players can succeed, but they also know that there's equivalent profiles that are like for like, all gunning in the same position. Carney Chukwuemekwa is arguably the best example. And as a consequence, when you sell them, you do turn that profit. So you're dining off someone that doesn't succeed for Chelsea. But in answer to the question, you're never signing them solely because you think they're such good value, we're going to flip them and they don't have a Chelsea future. Because if players ever got wind of that, they would never join in the first place.
You mentioned Maresca's point of view on the center backs, and so we got a question from Sachet, which was, how much involvement does Maresca have on transfer decisions? Is it all the sporting directors making the decisions? Does he have a little bit of say in that process? And like, I guess, you know, given that there have been quite a few comings and goings since he took over, like, do you get a sense that he is really involved, not involved at all?
Well, he's the manager of the football club, so of course he's involved, because he's the one that has to select the players, and the recruitment is for his style and system. And remember, and contrary to some suggestions during last season, Maresca's on a long-term contract, very intentional. It wasn't like Poch, 2 years. And the first sort of review, not over his future and not anything negative, but the first manager appraisal in a formal sense, I'm told, comes at the end of this season. So, of course, he has a say in recruitment, but no veto. And by say, that means he's in the WhatsApp groups, he's in the recruitment meetings, but the final decision is taken collaboratively. And as you would expect, is led by the sporting directors with ownership input. All of the main owners, Todd Bowley, Jose Feliciano, and Badad Egbali, have a kind of veto, and that extends to transfers. So they could step in, but naturally they themselves are listening to the sporting directors and very often going with the majority. And Maresca is part of this model. And in my opinion, the biggest misconception about recruitment is that the manager should have a say or that everyone should be aligned. And the most successful models, with Liverpool being a great example, have disagreement and debate. Because if you don't, you get a lot of yes people. So I expect every single transfer in a functional model to have senior people disagreeing or putting other targets forwards. Chris Vivell put forwards Benjamin Sesko at Man United. Ruben Amorim's suggestion was Ollie Watkins. It doesn't mean he didn't want Benjamin Sesko. Of course he does. But that's the key, that you have depth. So everyone goes, you know what? We've got 4 amazing options here. And I honestly can't really pick between each of them. So which one do we go for? And then your manager says one thing, your owner says one thing, your sporting director says one thing. You have a healthy and constructive and respectful argument almost, or debate is the better word. And then you come to your alignment and your decision based upon collaboration and respect. And sometimes Maresca may make an overpowering argument and win. And sometimes the recruitment team may win. For example, at Arsenal under Edu, it was Edu and Mikel Arteta saying Benjamin Sesko, but Andrea Berta came in and said Victor Gyökeres, and eventually Berta won that argument. But Mikel Arteta won the debate over bringing in Norgard and bringing in Zubimendi. So that's how it works. And not every single player will be at the manager's request. Joao Felix, I think, is a good example of that at Chelsea. But if you didn't have that disagreement and debate and almost lack of unity in the early stages before you bid of a transfer, you've just got a load of people bowing to hierarchy, bowing to sporting directors, maybe bowing to ownership. And then you have a disconnect between your football department, your video analysts, your scouts. So the model simply isn't functional. And that's kind of where we're at. Enzo Maresca, a leading voice, listened to, respected. Sometimes they bow to his judgment, sometimes they don't. He doesn't have a veto, but clearly he's a vital part of how they do their recruitment.
We got a question from Moonrunner, because I think the outgoings are still kind of in flux. Any updates on the following: Carney Chukwuemeka, Nicholas Jackson? You already touched on Nkunku, so I think we're on that one. Sterling, Vega, Chilwell. Any news there that is different than we talked about last week? Or are they still just pursuing deals for all 6 of them?
Yeah, Sterling and Chilwell don't really have options at the time of recording in a concrete sense. There is some Premier League interest in Sterling. Fulham had looked, but they're working on Reece Nelson, for example. I think Sterling would like to stay in the Premier League, but is not averse to other options. He doesn't want to go to Saudi Arabia. Nothing developing there yet. Do they have to do another loan with a buy option or an obligation? We'll have to wait and see. Chilwell's the most urgent one because he obviously wants to play every single week with a view to the World Cup. And I know throughout the window, clubs like Everton and West Ham have made approaches. Nothing yet in terms of formal bids. And I think Chilwell, a bit like Grealish, may have to make a wage concession of sorts in order to get the deal that he's looking for. Palace obviously had him on loan. I'm not aware at the time we're live of them coming back in. But I do think Chilwell might resolve itself quite quickly now, simply because the player's desperate to start the Premier League season or another league season playing regularly. Renato Vega wanted Atletico Madrid and kind of went all in on that. It didn't come off, so he's assessing new options now. I don't think Chelsea would think it would be a disaster if he stays, but they know that Vega wants to play centre-back every single week with a view to the World Cup and Portugal, so they will sanction that exit. And I think if they use a younger player at left centre-back, Joral Hatto is above Vega in the pecking order, and that's why maybe Vega will want to go. Al Nassr were the club that made a recent inquiry. Again, I have no info at this stage whether Vega wants to go to Saudi, but that is an exit that I'm anticipating. Alfie Gilchrist to Championship, as I exclusively revealed, or alternatively, Saudi Arabia. And Chelsea have dropped their asking price now. So it was 5 million all in. Now I'm told that it's 1.5 million in fixed, plus add-ons, plus sell-on, and Chelsea will sanction that deal. So there's been a few clubs that have looked, Derby, but I think they've got another right back or right centre-back in mind, and Blackburn had looked as well. So I think Championship is probably the most likely destination for Alfie Gilchrist, and that one could move this week as well. Not a great deal of money from Chelsea's point of view, but still a transfer that they're looking to resolve. And Nkunku, Leipzig are interested, but there's a bit of work to be done there still, and a lot may depend on the structure. I think Leipzig might prefer a loan with a buy option or a loan with an obligation. Chelsea want a permanent exit. Nico Jackson to Newcastle, still not unthinkable. At the moment, I think Chelsea's price needs to drop. They value Nico Jackson at 80 million. I think the likes of Newcastle and other suitors are thinking more like 60, 65. You might get a knock-on effect where if Milan don't do Rasmus Højlund and the price drops for Jackson, they come back in as well. So a bit like that crazy Monday when we had 3 or 4, I think you might find Chelsea outgoings again happen in a flurry. And by the end of this week or early next week, we'll start to get clarity. I don't think we'll get to deadline day with this many outgoings unresolved. I think Chelsea's expectation is between now and the middle of next week, we'll get a second wave of movement on the outgoings.
Okay. Let's leave the transfers there because I think we've beat that dead horse over the last couple of weeks, and let's talk about the season ahead right after this ad break. So thanks to sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, Ben. We talked a little bit about the preseason that was the classic 2-match in 3 days preseason that Chelsea organized just because of the time crunch. Obviously, post Club World Cup in the summer. Chelsea looked good against Leverkusen and Milan, despite huge lineup turnover in an effort to get everyone some minutes in their legs before the start of the Premier League season on Sunday against Crystal Palace. What did you take out of these matches, and how do you think that Chelsea are going to start the season?
Well, I thought Chelsea were dominant against Leverkusen. And again, I think as we've seen since Benfica first half before the delay onwards, every single match I see, they look more and more and more calm and confident in the system, starting with Rob Sanchez at the back, you have to say, which is why there's nothing in these Donnarumma links with Chelsea. I think it might be Man City, you never know, even Manchester United that go down that route. So there's definitely momentum, and that's unsurprising. They're sharp because they've been playing competitive football all summer. And as a result, I think they're going to start the season very strongly. And luckily, they don't really have to leave London in the early part of the season either. So I'm expecting them to make a really strong and positive start to the season. Then, if you think about Leverkusen, the opposition were very poor, I have to say, but Chelsea suffocated them. They dominated the ball. I liked the Caicedo-Santos pairing in midfield, and naturally Esteval stood out and appears to already have a very fluid understanding of how to play alongside Cole Palmer, which suggests maybe it's Pedro Neto Esteval on the right rather than Esteval coming on for Cole Palmer as a number 10, although that is, of course, an option. So that's kind of the takeaway from the Leverkusen game. Milan was like a strange one because it was boiling hot. And then Chelsea scored 2 quick goals. And then, of course, Milan had a man sent off. And as a result of that, it changed the complexion of the game, and the second half became a bit flat. And yet what we saw is once again the impact of 2 new signings. João Pedro with a well-taken early goal, Liam Delap with a penalty, and an excellent finish. And I like the 4th goal the most because it was quick, it was fluid, it was incisive, it was through the centre, it was a one-touch cushion, and then bang, Delap finishes, knows where the goal is. And we've seen that from both João Pedro and Liam Delap, that they are confident that they are going to take big chances. So I come back to what I've said before. I think Chelsea are minimum 80 points, 80 goals this season. And regardless of what people think about the defense, it looks like they're going to be able to outscore their opponents. And we saw that with a very comfortable win against Leverkusen and 4 goals against Milan.
Oh, 80 points minimum, huh? That was my 80-point mark was my season preview to get into the top 3. I think it's going to be a very, very top heavy season on that front in the Premier League. So yeah, that's going to be very, very interesting. Switching gears, right? Premier League is one thing. Premier League is the immediate horizon, but Champions League comes in mid-September. Chelsea haven't played in the Champions League for a couple of seasons. How prepared do you think that they are to take on that new and more difficult challenge, given the fact that we won't know the draw for a couple of weeks still? Do you think that Chelsea are ready to step up in that regard this year?
Yeah, I think so, just because it's Chelsea, right? And there's players at this football club that know exactly what the Champions League is all about. And there's winners. I mean, Marc Guehi is a winner with Spain. Reece James knows all about the Champions League and is the club captain. Enzo Fernandez is a World Cup winner. Moises Caicedo will take to the Champions League like a duck to water. Cole Palmer proves in big finals what he can do. Jamie Gittins has got experience from his time at Dortmund. So there's plenty of players there that will know what this is all about. I think it's more just that these Chelsea players, anyway, that have had previous Champions League experience, have been in a group where they were the top seed and they expected to finish first or second. And that meant you had a bit of sort of time to ease your way in. The big feedback I get from clubs that were involved in the league phase, the last Champions League, is if you get a bad draw, if you get like away at Real Madrid and then home against another big gun, then you might go loss or loss draw, and you might be like, yikes. And it kind of happened to Man City and PSG, even though PSG went on to win the tournament. Everyone talks about how brilliant PSG were, but only really in the knockout stage.
Yeah.
And if you go back to the league phase, they laboured. And both PSG and Man City and several other big clubs could actually have gone out. So I think they're going to have to understand that there's no time to play your way in. There's no time to rotate. So naturally, with the Conference League, we had a rotation between Conference League squad, particularly in the group stage when, say, Cole Palmer was excluded, and the Premier League. Now they're going to have to go from playing a big Premier League game to a big Champions League game, and from 6 to 8. And that's where you wonder whether the workload after the Club World Cup might eventually catch up with them. So we won't know until we see the draw, because that's the sort of difference, that it's not really like these are the groups. And okay, there's groups of death and there's so-called easier groups. But once you know that group, you plan home and away. If you played them once and you've not got a good result, you're like, what can we learn? You've got a case study right in front of you. Now you only play one team and 8 games. So Maresca's got a slightly different complexion. And I think we can't really judge how Chelsea will fare until we actually get to the point where we know the draw. And I think naturally there will be other teams, such as PSG, that are more favoured to finish in the top 8.
Yeah.
But I think it wouldn't be a disaster for Chelsea if they were in the next 8. Obviously, you've got to go through the playoff then, but then you still find yourself in the knockout stage. So I expect them to get out of the league phase, but I don't think it will be routine, and they will have to adapt quite quickly to the workload, the diminished rotation compared to Conference League and Premier League, and just the fact that you might get a horrific 8 fixtures. So I think it's hard to make predictions at this stage until after we've seen the draw.
Yeah, obviously, I think we have been kind of remarking for a long time that since the Winter World Cup in 2022 in Qatar, that this was essentially like 3 straight years of football leading into World Cup 2026. I think Chelsea have had their fair share of injuries over that span. A lot of other clubs have as well. Given, I think rightful injury concerns in a really jam-packed season with international breaks peppered throughout the first part of the season and a World Cup at the end, players really pushing for their places in those national teams. Do you think that, Chelsea are prepared from a strength and depth perspective to take on the challenges of this season as it stands today?
Yeah, I think so. I sort of sense that the recruitment drive to add these extra attackers is around that squad depth. So you effectively have Gittins and Garnacho should he arrive, and the ability to play Pedro Neto. Then on the right hand side, you've got Pedro Neto who favours the right but can switch sides. You've got Esteval William. At the moment, you've still got Tyreek George. You've obviously got Cole Palmer, Xavi Simons if he arrives. At the moment, you've got Nico Jackson and Nkunku, but they're expected to go. And you've still got Liam Delap and João Pedro. And I think that is enough depth and that will allow for enough rotation. And I can definitely see the logic of Maresca not going with a defined 9. I think perhaps Palmer picks himself, but I actually think you'll see equal and intentional rotation, regardless of if one or the other is scoring regularly, between João Pedro and Liam Delap. And I think that's because they're just so sort of different in many ways. João Pedro is more versatile. He's good against a low block. Liam Delap is good as a target man. He's excellent on the counter attack because if you play a quick direct ball to him, he can drop deeper and then others can burst forwards. João Pedro is great on the counter attack because he can go out wide, allowing other players to push into the center. And one thing I noticed against Milan was exactly that as all this movement happened, it was actually a player, for example, like Cucurella, that was suddenly the furthest forward at certain parts in certain games, lingering at the back post and getting in the box. So I don't think it'll be a case of only finding a best 11 and then having to play it and play it and play it and play it. I think Liam Delap and João Pedro know that there isn't like a starting 9. It's very much just who's the specialist for the kind of tactics for this kind of game. Newly promoted side, on the road, less of the ball, maybe more direct. Champions League football. And I think depending on the opposition, you might see quite an equal split in selection for both of those two, and possibly the same between Esteval and Pedro Neto. And again, Jamie Gittins, and if he arrives, Alejandro Garnacho. So for me, it's only really Cole Palmer that guarantees to start at that 10, and the whole team is kind of built around him. And as a result, I think Enzo Maresca will feel he can manage the workload and it won't take its toll. But naturally, we saw a lull in the festive period last season. So the wild card in all of this is just the long-term impact of the Club World Cup. Because my prediction is Chelsea are going to start strong. They're staying in London. They're confident. They are fresh now because the Club World Cup gives you that backhanded advantage of almost you're 4-5 competitive games in when these other teams haven't played their competitive games yet. So you're kind of at your peak because it is sort of 4, 5, 6, 7 games in that teams, especially with new signings, really gel. But then what about when we get 20, 25 games in and everyone is kind of starting to get a bit tired over the festive period, and then Chelsea have got all those Club World Cup games. So that's the wild card we don't know, especially if it's interspersed with Champions League games in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I totally agree. You cannot say Cole Palmer or Moises Caicedo to answer this question, so I'm going to challenge you outside of those two players. If Chelsea do compete against, on all fronts and all competitions, and I mean, I guess compete in my terminology here means that they are challenging all the way. It's because which player had a great season outside of Caicedo and Palmer?
Yeah, I would say Marc Guehi still. I think he'll be a candidate for one of Chelsea's best players of the season. And I would give an honourable mention to Trev Chalobah if he stays, because I think he's going to be outstanding. I'm not putting him forward as player of the season. But what I would say is don't be surprised if most improved player is actually Rob Sanchez. And then was I to go out on a limb and pick a kind of non-obvious or Cole Palmer, Caicedo, absolute player of the season, my number one choice, so everything else kind of counts as somewhere there, my number one choice is going to be Pedro Neto, because I think he was outstanding during the Club World Cup. And I know people are assuming it will be Esteval on the right and Palmer through the center, but don't be surprised if Pedro Neto has a standout season.
Excellent. Okay. And I guess final question before we break for a couple of weeks here. The lineup that we saw against Milan on Sunday, is that likely to be what you see starting against Palace on the upcoming Sunday?
Yeah, I think Chelsea will beat Palace, by the way. I think they'll make a statement win, even though Palace did excellent in the Community Shield. And I'm really disappointed for them that they got demoted to the Conference League. It certainly seems harsh. But yeah, my prediction is Enzo Maresca has pretty much shown his hand. So Sanchez in goal. I think James will be at right back. Cucurella obviously at left back. And then I do think the centre back pairing will be Tosin and Trevor Chalobah. We know that Romeo Lavia is not ready. So obviously throughout the season, I can actually foresee Caicedo, Lavia, and it might be Enzo Fernandez that misses out in a few big games. But at the moment, I think you're looking at Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez, and Cole Palmer. I don't think he's got a massive choice because Garnacho's not here yet on the left-hand side. So Gittins, Neto, and probably João Pedro with Liam Delap on the bench, even though Liam Delap came on and scored 2 late goals. But my only sort of wild card is what I said before. Is there a scenario where Gittins being brand new doesn't start, Pedro Neto goes over to the left, and Esteval Willian gets a start on the right? I wouldn't rule out that possibility because they think Esteval Willian is ready immediately. So that might be the only change. But I think because Neto is in form and playing on the right, it might just be the same 11 as we saw in the win over Milan.
Well, it does feel like the first day of school, like we're all going back. Sunday is going to be a lot of fun. I think we're all looking forward to it. Ben, thanks for joining and kind of talking through a lot of the intricacies around the transfer dealings and around what we have coming up for the season. We're very excited. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions on Discord, and apologies if I didn't get to every single one of them, but very happy to get this one in the books. And look, Chelsea fans, go give Ben a virtual high five in as many ways as you can, because he's been doing a hell of a lot of work this summer. So I think that'll wrap. I think that'll wrap this one. Getting ready for Sunday. And until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.